You are listening to the Dare to Love podcast with your hosts, Sonica Tinker and Christian Peterson, founders of LoveWorks. Hey everybody, welcome to the Dare to Love podcast. This is Christian Peterson. I'll be your host today. I'm really excited to introduce you to my guest. I have a very special guest with me today. So I'd like to first I'll say, hi Dave. Thanks so much for chatting with me a little bit, and then I'll introduce you.
Hi, Christian. It's just a super big delight to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I know Dave Klaus we met through our involvement with the Mankind Project, which is an international nonprofit men's organization that we're both part of. And that's how we originally met. And I'm super stoked to talk to Dave today. Dave is like, pretty much as far as I'm concerned, as close as you can get to a Renaissance man in today. So Dave is professionally, is a public defender and has been a public defender for many, many years. And he is also a poet and a musician and a martial artist and an ordained Zen priest. And who knows what all else. Maybe we'll get to hear a little bit about that. But thank you so much for being here, Dave. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me too. I love that we always have great conversations. So to actually have one get recorded is especially fun.
I know it is fun, and I'm trusting that our conversation will be useful for all of our listeners. So, Dave, I wonder if you could start with like maybe say what was happening in your life that sparked your interest for doing men's work and relationship work and diving into spiritual work. Where did all that come from? I thought we could start there.
Yeah, I'm definitely one of those men who was drawn to the men's work because I was having a really hard time in my life. Like I was having a crisis of a year. It was 2010, and and I had done different kind of things over the years, therapy and, different stuff to work on myself. But it got to be 2010 and I was having a chronic like medical pain issue that disrupted my life. Couldn't do athletics and a lot of things I was used to doing. And I know you identify with that issue.
Yeah,
And
all too well.
it really threw me into a spin. And I was honestly just numbing out in different ways that were not healthy, and burnt out on my job, just feeling burnt out on life.
Hmm.
Um, and I had friends who had been doing the work with the Mankind Project for several years. And as we tend to do, we warrior brothers, they kept saying, "Hey, you might want to do this weekend. You should do
Hmm.
this."
Yeah.
And I kept saying, "No, I'm good. I don't need that. I don't want to do anything like that." And they kept at me, which I really appreciate. And then finally, I hit a point that spring where it was literally like, why not go do this? Like I'm miserable. I'm not taking care of myself. I'm stuck in a rut. Like let's go try this. And I ended up having a profound experience that's really changed everything in my life ever since.
Hmm. So is what you're describing, is that what sometimes is called just plainly a midlife crisis?
I tend to think of it as a midlife process because, as far as I
Nice.
can tell, everybody experiences it in
Yeah.
some way. Um, and and I say process specifically too because I feel like I've had, if you really count the crises, I've probably had more than a few. I mean,
Mhm.
these moments of intensity. I'm kind of a strong flavored person. Like I get really intense and passionate about things, and that includes when I'm struggling and depressed or anxious. Like, man, I really go for it. So it's just I've just come to recognize it's just part of the way I am. It's part of my life, and then I'm getting a little better at riding the waves. But that's the fun work for me.
Yeah, Sonic has often, as you said, I can personally relate to the painful experiences of being limited by, what's going on in body and can't do this and
Mm.
can't do the usual activities. And Sonic has often said in observing me, she said, well, it seems to me like every time you have one of these breakdowns or go into your own darkness, it always seems to be followed by the next piece of growth or the next expansion. I wonder if that's been true for you.
That's 100% true. And I think of it. I was just on a Zen retreat, and our one of the Roshis was talking about evolution and how many of us, me, I have this story, or have had this story, that somehow evolution is like a steady climb. And in
Hmm.
truth, it's this painful, roller coaster of serious difficulty and serious challenge that causes change, and then the change, and then, then this integration process. How do I integrate what I've learned in the darkness, or in the challenge, or in the flatness, that can
Hmm.
come with those kind of moments.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And maybe if you could share, we're on the Dare to Love podcast here. We, of course, talk a lot about relationships. I wonder, you're describing this period of your life where you were, where you said you were miserable and things not working out so well. How was that impacting your relationship life? I know you're married and you have two children. Well, I don't know if you call them children anymore.
Yeah, they're teenagers, yeah, and, man, Anya's going to college next year, so
Wow.
it's amazing, but,
Yeah.
yeah, the short answer, it was terrible for my relationship. It was a really challenging time, and, Alicia and I have been married for 22 years, and we were, together several years before that, so it's been a long time together, and, um it's not all it's a lot of work, it's a lot of effort, it's a lot of intention, as you well know, in being in a
Hmm.
relationship. And one of the things I really discovered in sort of the 2010 meltdown was, um, how much my personal kind of integrity and stability and outlook, how much that really affected not just me, but our relationship, our family, like everything, and how much I needed the support of Alicia and the kids and everyone else in my life to help steady me through that. But yeah, there's, just like evolution, I was saying, I think the relationships go in these sort of fits and starts and growth branches, and there's a real need for nurturing and cultivation, lest that lest that go wrong, you know.
Hmm. Yeah, certainly. And I wonder, it's something that we often hear. Both you and I talk to a lot of men through our men's work, and of course also through our love works work. One of the things I often come across are men who will later tell me that, I knew something wasn't, excuse me, I knew something wasn't quite right. And, my wife had kept telling me, or I had all these signs and senses that something wasn't quite right. But, dot, dot, dot. And then it wasn't until something completely terrible or breakdown happened that they would reach out for support and change. I don't know if you relate to that, or did you go through a long period of this not working and being miserable before you took some
Yeah.
different kind of action?
Absolutely. I mean, I think first of all, just like I said, I've always experienced aspects of depression and anxiety at different times in my life, and that's, I think it's just kind of part of my makeup, um, kind of the way I'm built, and with that comes a lot of good stuff, which is I'm very sensitive, and I feel things, like I feel things very intensely, and that really contributes to my art and doing writing and poetry and other stuff, and it's also kind of intense and painful at times too.
Mhm.
And so I think, but I think also the sort of for lack of a better term, the man box, that sort of story of how men are supposed to be, really held me back. Like I
Mhm.
thought there was something wrong with me if I wasn't doing well. There's something wrong with me if I have to ask for help. There's something wrong with me for just feeling this way. And I remember one of the, I mean, there's, on the Mankind Project weekend, there's lots of kind of epiphanies and moments, but one for
Mhm.
me was sitting in a circle of a bunch of men, probably 30, 35 men, and everyone's sharing like this really personal stuff. And we were instructed, hey, if this resonates with you, if another man's story resonates with you, raise your hand to let them know, like, I hear you, or I understand, or I got some of that, some aspect of acknowledgement. And I remember talking about what was going on for me and how hopeless at times I had felt and how beaten down. and I saw all these men raising their hands, and it was
Mhm.
like such a relief to be like, wow, it's not just me. Like this is actually pretty common to men, and now like 9 years later, after sitting in thousands of circles of men, I know that's true. I know that it's common for men to
Mhm.
feel sad and anxious and to have a hard time and to wonder about their place in things and to wonder about my role in my family and my life and my job. I mean, and that exactly that midlife piece comes up. I'm 50 years old, so it just gets more and more juicy, more and more interesting. But the key for me was
Yeah.
recognizing it's not just me.
Yeah, for sure. I just yesterday I was interviewing a man who came to a recent men's retreat I hosted. And at that retreat, there were both men who had been involved in personal and men's and relationship work for a while, and there were also men like this man who had never done anything like that. And it was funny. He like what he said was pretty much exactly what you
Mm.
just said. He said one of the biggest epiphanies was evidently I'm not the only one who seems to be torturing myself in my head, and sometimes that turns into torturing my partner or the people around me, but that's still seen, even after all these years of, a progress and personal growth, that is still, it seems, a really big thing for, maybe everybody, but just men in this piece of the conversation that I think I'm the only one.
Yeah, I mean, I was on a weekend, a Mankind Project weekend, and one of our leaders was talking about this aspect of trees and how trees in a forest um, can actually communicate with each other under the ground and through chemicals and through energetic exchange. And they can tell when one of the trees needs some support, is like having a
Hmm.
beetle infestation or having a sickness. And they'll literally send energy and chemical support and food over to the tree. The difficulty I find is that when I'm in that space of being the one that needs the support, it's so easy for me to contract and
Hmm.
kind of tighten up and go into a ball and sort of want to hide, that it actually makes it really difficult, if not impossible, for me to receive that love and healing and energy from the community, from the forest. And
Hmm.
so much of the work for me, and I was just doing yoga this morning and thinking about this, like, it's how do I relax? Like, how do I open up when I'm having a hard time? When
Hmm.
there's maybe there's an argument with my wife, we have our issues, we trigger each other about stuff, or maybe it's something with my kids, or maybe it's something at work. These moments come, and the question for me is, what do I do when it gets kind of tough like that? And I still, of course, have a tendency to contract and tighten up, but what I'm getting
Hmm.
better at is catching that sooner and going into relaxation and basically kind of preparing for when it's going to hurt. What am I going to do
Hmm.
when it's going to hurt? How am I going to show up? And that's just made a huge difference in my life.
I was wondering. I like how you say that. Can you think of a specific example with Alicia, for example, of where you have had that experience?
Yeah. Uh, it comes up, well, just to use a small example. We're in the kitchen and, um, I'm making some dinner and I'm kind of doing my thing. And she has this tendency to want to come in and help in the middle of me making the dinner.
Hmm.
And that's great and nice, except for sometimes she doesn't do it the way I want to do it.
Hmm.
And I can get irritated and get annoyed by that and find myself stiffening, find myself contracting, judging, kind of going into this, contraction spot.
Hmm.
And the trick then is to catch that and be like, wait a minute, pause, what am I doing? And then to really be like, reach out and say, hey, sorry about that. I went away there. Thank you for helping me. And, how can we do this a little differently so that we can both get what we want out of this? And but it's really that question of me, I often think of it's like, who's willing to soften first in that disconnection, And if one of us, and it varies between the two of us, if one of us is willing to kind of settle down, kind of de-escalate and say, hey, what I really want is to be with you whether you're making
Hmm.
dinner or whether we're sitting there or whatever. I want to be with you. I want to can be connected. I want to love you. And if I can drop to that level, then things get back on track. Of course, lots of times I'm not so wise and I just get stuck in my in my little story,
Right.
my little contraction, and and that's where the work is.
That's a great, that's so funny you gave that example, Sonic, and I had a pretty much 100% identical example last night in the kitchen. Because I'm the one who normally does I'm like the main chef in our house. And it was exactly that. She came in and wanted to help, which is awesome. And she wasn't exactly doing it the way I'm used to doing it. I'm
Mhm.
just used to moving with 500 miles an hour in the kitchen. And it was a mirror of what you just said. Okay, at first there was a little trigger moment of feeling the tension, and I
Mhm.
got a little snippy, and then hang on, okay, pause. Let's see, how would we have liked to have done that? And
Yeah.
that's a really great tip for everybody listening. We do this at our workshops, and I can hear you do that at home too. Like, we do do-overs, just
Mhm.
like we did with our kids when they were little. We'll literally do a do-over and say, okay, hang on a second, that interaction did not go how I wanted it to go. Can we try that again?
Mm.
And we'll literally play it out again in a better way,
Well,
which is just
Alicia and I have been to several of your workshops, and I love the do-over. It's one of the really key tools we took away from your work, and it comes up everywhere. I mean, we were talking before the show. It's like, we're talking about relationships, and of course, that's kind of our intimate relationships. But it's everybody. It's every relationship in the world. And
mhm,
how many chances for do-overs there are where it just kind of gets off to the wrong foot, or there's the wrong kind of energy or the wrong tone, and people get bristly. I get bristly, and then it's like, oh,
mhm,
wait a minute, how do I keep settling back down? Um, I mean, in my Zen work, we would say, how do I, embody the Buddha? How do I
mhm,
embody Tara? How do I be Christ? How do I show up in this the way that I really aspire to, and let go of that that itch, that irritation, that feeling of I'm right and you're wrong. How do I let go of that
mhm.
stuff so I can keep coming back to the moment?
Yeah, that's great. And hey, you mentioned that you and Alicia have been to, have been in our workshop programs. And, I know you, at the time you came, you had already been engaged in personal growth work for many years. So I'm curious what motivated you both as a couple to dive into work like this?
Well, it was pretty easy for me, to be honest, because I know you and just admire you and love you so much. I was really eager to check out your work.
Mhm.
To be blunt, I'm workshoppy, like I like
Mhm.
I like this stuff. I like going to a weekend and getting really deep and doing intimacy work or whatever it looks like to really connect with people and really share. That helps me. That's part of my work of opening up and getting
Mhm.
away from the contraction. So contrary wise, Alicia, and without speaking too much for her, but she's not as much like that. She's more shy and uh, is it has for her it's pretty difficult going to a workshop and being really showing herself.
Mhm.
So I had to talk her into it a little bit. And what was great was that she had a wonderful time the very first workshop we went to, because it was such a you guys make such a friendly and sort of safe atmosphere without pressure that it really worked for her. And that very first workshop was huge for us. We experienced like I kind of would call it like a kind of a melting. Like, we had
Mhm.
certain hardness and iciness that had developed for us. And that weekend, it was like it just melted away and we could really see each other again, in a clear way. And it was a hugely powerful boost to our relationship. I'm super grateful.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm really glad to hear that. We certainly aim to create a friendly and safe environment we always figure that well, there are many styles of relationship work, of course, but ours is not one of confronting and getting in your face style.
Hmm. Well, and also just doing
His
it with other people too. Wasn't it, a lot of the work was with Alicia, but it wasn't all with Alicia. We kind of mixed around and got to connect with different
Mhm.
people, I was just telling a single friend of mine, like, it's such a great workshop for a single person, to really get a clearer sense of what I might be looking for in a relationship, or how I want to communicate what I'm looking for, or what I want to ask for. I mean, I thought it was really, really brilliant.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. And yeah, it is open to singles and couples and people who are, in between, and it's complicated and pretty
Hmm.
much in any possible relationship configuration. So, hey, I'm curious about how has what you've learned through your own work and through our work, how is that impacting you in your work world? I know well, you can say a little more about that, but as far as I know about your work, you're in a pretty high pressure cooker kind of environment with a lot at stake.
Mm.
How has that impacted your
Yeah.
life at work?
I mean, it definitely, falls into that big category of, as we were just saying, it's kind of everything is about relationships. And that's
Hmm.
especially true in my work. So I'm a public defender attorney, and I've been
Hmm.
doing that in Oakland, or Alameda County, for the whole county, for about 22 years, actually, just about as long as I've been married.
Yeah.
Um, and on there's lots of layers of the job. Obviously, we represent indigent people who are
Uh-huh.
accused of crimes, and so sometimes that's doing jury trials and investigations, but a lot of it is kind of working things out within the system, whether by plea bargain, or some negotiation, or some kind of explanation of what really happened in a case that causes the case to be dismissed. I mean, there's all kinds of um, a wide variety of outcomes, and basically they all really boil down to having relationships with people. And
Mm.
so there's 100 public defenders in my county, and there's about 150 prosecutors. And it's a repeat business. We know these folks. We talk to them all the time. That's who I know. I've known some of these, my adversaries, so called, for
Mhm.
20 years. And just like a marriage relationship, it's super important to have a good relationship with the people I'm working with, and even that I'm opposing in court. Even when we have, maybe especially when we have what seem like adversarial um, intentions, um, yet we can still bring a level of diplomacy and listening, and honoring, that
Mhm.
makes it work. Um, and so, for example, the opportunity for a do-over with somebody.
Mhm.
We're talking about a case in court, and maybe the DA says something that I don't appreciate, and I get snippy, and then I say something back, and now all of a sudden we're in this conflict,
Mhm.
and it's like, hold on, I can take that moment to stop and pause and say, you know what, sorry about that. Let's just start over again. Here's what I was
And
trying to say.
do you actually do
Yeah,
that?
yeah, no, here's what I was trying to say, and I think, to me, the key piece of that, and which is a bit key element of Mankind Project, is accountability. It's like,
Mhm.
hey, I messed up, um, and let me address that, and not from a place of shame, or I suck, or I'm the worst, but it's
Mhm.
from a place of, hey, I'm a human being. I make mistakes. I just made one. Here's what I intended. Let's get back on track. And I just find that works incredibly powerfully uh, in my work as a public defender, and I have a
Mhm.
story. It works everywhere. I mean, it's just as a way of interacting with the world that is so much more gentle and responsive. Um,
Yeah. Actually, I was gonna ask you, you said I have a theory, it works everywhere. I was gonna ask you if you've seen that, at home with your wife or your teenagers, this piece of accountability, how that has changed in how you show up with them.
oh, absolutely. I mean, the first thing to say is I screw things up all the time.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
that's just part of the way I am. And I guess in that way, again, think I'm like most people, but I like to try stuff, and I like to do interesting stuff, and so I definitely blow it sometimes, and
Mhm.
overshoot or overcommit, or there's all kinds of mistakes. And so, yeah, especially with teenagers, because teenagers, among other things, have a incredibly sensitive hypocrisy meter.
Mhm.
And if they see me not being in integrity with what I said, or what I promised, in my actions, they just smell it right away. and all of a
Mhm.
sudden anything I had to say to them is seen with a scant eye. And so if I can
Mhm.
really model, hey, here's I made a mistake, here's what happened, here's why it happened, here's what I learned from that, here's what I want to do going forward. It's such a clean process for moving on and getting
Mhm.
through. And I guess back to that earlier point in the conversation, it's a way of avoiding those sort of knotty blockages,
Mhm. Yeah.
those hurdles that we develop in relationships.
Yeah, that's really great. And I just want to like stress that to everybody who's listening who have kids, or whether they're younger kids or teenagers, or that's been absolutely been our experience too. That when like you say, they have a huge hypocrisy meter or BS meter, and they're kind of looking for
Mm,
incongruencies almost. But it's been our experience that often we have one teenager and one who's almost 21. Um, that growing up, they often didn't want to they often were not open to us like teaching them stuff about how one should be in relationship. And here's all the cool tools we know. Here,
mhm,
I'm going to teach them to you. Often that was not an opening, but they definitely have been, they've been watching and keeping their eye out for how do we actually deal with our own breakdowns? How do we deal with, difficult people that we encounter in the
mhm.
world? And now that they're young adults, it's clearly visible to us that's been, they've been taking the best of that. Now they're doing it in their own relationships,
Y
which, well, for one, feels really good to
yeah.
me as a parent and to us as parents, but it also really tells me that just living in a good way and cleaning up my own messes and doing do-overs and being an accountable person in all my relationships, it really gets passed on.
It's a beautifully, virtuous virus, right, to pass along. It's like, what does it
Yeah.
look like to really like, what does it look like to be really kind and compassionate, and supportive and loving, and to really pull that off on a consistent basis. I mean, it's it's a big goal. It's why in our Zen work, we take a vow. It's like I vow to, reduce all suffering as far as I can for all beings. It's like a massive commitment, and
Hmm.
in a certain way, maybe an impossible commitment, and in another way, an infinitely possible commitment. So it's like,
Yeah.
how do I just keep coming back to that practice? How do I keep coming back to accountability, integrity, honesty, the do-over, all these wonderful ideas and tools.
Yeah, I remember, that's often been one of my I guess my one of my fears in life is, that I would not be a useful person and that my life would not
Mm,
be worth anything to anybody. And I remember seeing this it's a Christmas movie we saw just, in the last Christmas year, and I think it was a Charles Dickens story somehow. And there was an older gentleman in there in that movie who said, "Well, you're never useless as long as you relieve the burden of just one other being,"
mm,
or something like that. And I've always taken that to heart. We might not be able to alleviate all suffering, but
mhm.
I can definitely do it, be useful in that respect to one person or two people or three people,
Yeah,
someone close to me.
absolutely, and certainly, and I think one of the most important people to be kind and generous and loving to is myself. I mean,
Hmm.
that's the thread of this whole conversation is like when I take care of myself and when I do my work and when I commit to my practice and when I ask for support, really ask for what I want, that's how I can really make the world a better place. That's how I can really contribute because I'll be the first to admit I get overwhelmed by the world. I mean, it's hard right now, and there's a lot going on, and it's easy for me to succumb to that story you just said of like somehow I don't matter or I'm not going to make a difference. And the best way for me to pierce that story is just to take care of myself and take care of those people that are right within my arm's reach. What can I? How do I
Hmm.
do that? And if I'm having a difficulty with that, how do I what's being offered to me to look at? What do I need to look at? What's getting in the way?
Yeah. So hey, as we begin to wrap up, I wonder what you would, now that you're now someone for whom it's now become just part of your life to engage in self-inquiry and personal growth work and relationship work, both for yourself and with your wife at home and with your kids. It's become normal for you.
Mm.
What would you say now, with the wisdom you have now? What would you say to someone who is in the phase where it's just hard and maybe even miserable, in their relationships or elsewhere? Like, what would you say to someone like that to maybe inspire reaching out,
Yeah. Well,
as opposed to going through another 10 years of misery
yeah.
and then when everything burns to the ground, then reach out for
Mm.
support?
Well, honestly, I don't have to look too far back. I mean, just even in December, I was I was feeling really down and really stuck and really, I had this story of I'm kind of trapped and things are not the way I want and I can't make it the way I want. And so, boy, it's I don't want to give the illusion that somehow I've figured this out or I've got a handle on it. And what I do notice, like that month, is when I get sad or when I get anxious, the question for me is, well, what's this trying to tell me? Like, there's some message, there's something that I need to understand that this sadness or this fear is directing me to. And the thing that came up this time was like, wow, like I'm kind of I was physically out of integrity. Like I had kind of fallen off my workout regime. I was drinking too much in December with the holiday stuff. Wasn't eating the way I wanted, and it was affecting my sleep. And then it was showing up in how alert I was at work and how effective I was in my job. And so I was getting this feeling of I'm out of integrity, like I'm not keeping my commitments the way I really want to. And once I zeroed in on that, then I could really shift back into this accountability process and like, okay, time to clean up the diet, time to get back to the gym, time to
Hmm.
ask for support, time to, really get organized at work and notice what I need to do to be efficient and effective again. And above all, time to ask for help and support from my people, from my family, from my men's group, from my Zen order. I'll ask anybody for help. I mean, anyone
Hmm.
that I can reach out to and talk to. Um, it's again, it's that how to oppose the contraction, how to go from being the balled up, sad little tree in the forest to the one that's open and accepting love and care and energy.
Yeah, that's certainly, if nothing else, that is certainly a sign we can all look for. When you feel, for one, the little voice in your head that tells you how, hey, you're not living up to what you could be, or you're not feeling good about what you're doing. And when you feel that physical contraction,
Mm.
that's a good time to reach out for any kind of support. And we certainly both, both Sonic and I, with our work, and yeah, myself just as a person, I would love to pass that on to anybody, that whenever you reach that point where stuff just isn't working and your relationships aren't as smooth as you want them to be, is to not wait another 5 years before reaching out for help. And I
Absolutely.
know I say that being someone myself who learned that the hard way, because I waited. It probably took me 10 years from when I started being miserable until till the point where I really did something about it, because I just couldn't handle more misery. So I would really love to pass it on to everybody listening, to pass this on to your friends. If
Yeah.
you can shorten the span between where you need help and where you get
Yeah,
help.
don't wait. And also, I don't know, it's amazing how much change can happen and how I mean, there's one of the stories I have when I'm caught in a dark loop is that nothing's going to change. Like I'm just stuck this
Hmm.
way, and that is the biggest lie of all because it just keeps changing. I mean, whether I want it to or not, it just all keeps changing. So
Yeah.
the real question is how do I surf these waves? How do I keep going? How do I keep whatever you want to call it, treading water? How do I
Hmm.
keep doing the thing I need to do to just sort of get through this tough spot because it's going to shift again and it's going to turn
Hmm.
in a lighter, more positive direction. And then we get that payoff that Sonica mentioned, that
Hmm.
that period of growth and insight and relief. and blooming. Like
Yeah.
you got to have a winter if you're going to have the spring.
Hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. Hey, the last thing I want to ask you in our conversation here is, now you've been, as a married man, you've been married for, you said, 22 years, and I know you've had your ups and downs, and you came to do our
Hmm.
work. If you like, what's the best thing, if you were to say the best one or two things you have learned about how to make a marriage great?
Mm.
I know that's a big question
Yeah.
here to finish off with, but what would your
Um,
what would you say to that?
um, I think one big piece is really embracing gratitude and cultivating gratitude, and finding, like this morning I said on the way out the door, I was like, "Thanks, sweetie, for dealing with all the tax stuff the last 3 days
Hmm.
that we really needed to get done, and like you crushed that. It was awesome." It's like finding
Hmm.
those moments to really be appreciative. And the other piece of that is finding space to laugh and have fun and be lighthearted.
Yeah.
And because the challenge for us anyway of being parents of teenagers is like a lot of times it feels like we're business partners,
Hmm.
and it's easy to fall into logistics and
Yeah.
calendars and this and that. And boy, I really just need that other moment of like, I'm gonna go grab you and tickle you, or we're gonna watch a funny show
Yeah.
together, or I want to tell you about a funny thing that happened at work, and just having the lightness of laughter and enjoyment. I just think that that helps us so much.
Thank you. That is sage advice as far as I'm concerned. That's really awesome. Yeah, and Sonic and I try our best to live by that
Mm,
all the time. I will literally sometimes just start tickling her and running down the hall or something,
yeah,
because it brings such lightness into life.
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. That is a great piece of wisdom to end on. I really appreciate you taking some time to share about your experiences. Thank you very much, Dave Klaus.
Thank you, Christian. This has just been a true joy. I'm so appreciative.
Yeah, I'm glad we'll get to cross paths many times.
Very soon.
And hey, the last thing I want to offer, I don't know if you're interested in that. I know you post some of your poetry often. Is that something you'd like to have our listeners have access to?
Yeah, sure. My website is www.daveklaus.net, Daveklaus, and I have some of my poetry on there, and also a bunch of my essays and some photographs. It's kind of my artist expression site. So yeah, I'd love for people
Yeah.
to check it out.
All right. Yeah, I highly recommend it. There's some, I'm for one myself, I'm actually not much of a poetry reader nor a poet writer. And many of the poems I have learned in the last several years that have really hit me have come from your hand.
Hmm,
So
that's sweet.
check it out, everybody. All right. That's it. All we got for today. Thanks to Dave Klaus, and thanks for everybody to join the Dare to Love podcast. We look forward to being with you on the next episode. You have been listening to the Dare to Love podcast with your hosts, Sonica Tinker and Christian Peterson, founders of LoveWorks. And hey, if you found this podcast to be useful, would you go ahead and hit the share button and share this with your friends on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or wherever your favorite hangouts are? Thanks so much for sharing the love. And you can find more about our work at loveworksforyou.com. Thank you.